Tonight on MetroFocus.
Special report. Protesters storm the streets as these videos of police altercations with a 19-year-old and a minor go viral. With the incidents under investigation, both sides go on the attack. Was it proper policing or police brutality? Then life behind the badge and on the streets. Is the NYPD under siege? As a new commissioner takes the helm, will he be able to fix the damage? Two former New York City cops join us to discuss the dangers, the disrespect, the accusations, and the possible solutions. Those issues and more as the special edition of MetroFocus starts right now.
This is MetroFocus with Raphael P. Rahman, Jack Ford, and Jenna Flanagan. MetroFocus is made possible by James and Merrill Tisch, Sue and Edgar Wackenheim III, the Sylvia A. and Simon B. Poida Programming Endowment to Fight Anti-Semitism, Bernard and Irene Schwartz, Barbara Hope Zuckerberg, and by
Good evening and welcome to MetroFocus. I'm Jenna Flanagan. The NYPD has been dominating the headlines with no signs of slowing down. Two separate incidents involving police and young men of color have gone viral. In one, 19-year-old Adrian Napier is seen with his hands up being apprehended by multiple cops on a subway train. In the other, 15-year-old Benjamin Marshall is punched in the face by an officer on a subway platform. The minor is now suing the NYPD for $5 million, and the officer who took the swing is on desk duty as the incident is investigated. Both arrests sparked a protest against the police and possible brutality in the transit system. Hundreds rallied, many jumped turnstiles, and some chanted, "Ante up, punch the cop." One protester even wrote NYPD, KKK on a police car. Activists claim the police are framing these arrests as routine cases of fare-beating enforcement, while the police say they had nothing to do with the fares. And now that James O'Neill is stepping down as top cop, will his replacement, Dermot Shea, be able to control the damage? Joining me now to put all of this into perspective is Graham Witherspoon, a retired NYPD detective who formerly served in the department's transit unit and is a founding member of 100 Blacks in Law Enforcement Who Care. And Darren Porcher, a retired NYPD lieutenant who worked transit in the Bronx, Harlem, and Washington Heights, and has a history of training cadets at the police academy. Welcome to you both.
Thanks for having us.
All right, that's a lot to cover, and of course we have a lot to talk about in the show. So first, I want to get to these major incidents that have gone viral that everyone seems to be talking about. And right now, we're just going to toss to the first one, and that is of 15-year-old Benjamin Marshall, who was seen in a viral video being punched in the face by a police officer. So we're just going to throw to that very quickly. All right, so of course we know all viral videos don't tell the entire story. So from both of you, I'd like to get your perspective on how you see this video. So Darren.
Well, whenever we see a video where use of force is being employed, it's always troubling. There's never a good way to view use of force. So we also have to take in consideration whenever we see a video such as this one, we generally see a snippet. We need a more comprehensive overview of what the particular incident is. And that's one of the reasons why I praise and tout the body cameras, because it introduces a level of transparency as to when the incident started, the beginning, and the end of it. And so I revert back to my experience as a lieutenant in the Internal Affairs Bureau in the NYPD. Oftentimes, I had instances where a video or a snippet was introduced, and it appeared as if there was a level of misconduct that was committed by the officer. We had to conduct a more comprehensive investigation to determine what preceded the incident, what happened, and what ended it. So that being said, there's always this investigative process, or I should say the internal investigative process, that really would provide the final outcome outcome as to what the assessment for the department would be. I can understand there's going to be a level of outrage from the community, but the truth of the matter is we need to let it play its course, and that's going to be the determining factor as to what happened and what didn't happen. And then once we get the findings on this case based on the due process, then we can make a more credible assessment as to what we have in play as a result.
Graham, your thoughts?
I think it's important that civilians do video when an incident occurs. It's not only for the protection of the individual involved, and can be for the police officer as well. A camera sitting on my chest is only going to give me one angle. As we saw in the Eric Garner case, the young man that shot that video, we saw a panoramic view of what Eric was doing and what the police officers were doing. If I have a camera on my chest, you can't see what I'm doing below the line of the camera. But an independent line, and at that, it's not a panoramic shot. As I looked at the video, I saw things which really disturbed me.
Sorry, just want to be clear, which video are we talking about?
The one at J Street, where the young man was struck in the face. Because I see, in the earlier frame, I see a guy running up to a fellow and just straight out hitting him. And that young fellow was facing the camera. And a few seconds later, the officer comes back and attacks a second young man. I don't know if it's the same officer, but there was a lieutenant in the shot in the white shirt. He's trying to get control of everything, and the officer's trying to move the kids back. An arrest is being made back up. But when that second officer came and punched the young fellow in the face, what was that? You know, in having a body camera, it's going to give an angle, and it's going to give a limited scope of view for that camera. Same thing with the person doing the video independently. That video doesn't give you a 180-degree panoramic view. So having the video is important, but it's important for people to step back out of the melee. We had a lot of young people there. We've been talking with teens over the last week with regard to this issue. And I've told them when there's a major situation like this, you need to step back. You cannot be a witness when you become the defendant.
Well, I want to take that very important point of how it's important to step back and ask how that message would fit when we have other community leaders, in some cases politicians, who are having understandably but very emotional reactions, as other people are, to some of these incidents. And right now we have one from Brooklyn Borough President Eric Adams. He held a press conference shortly after this, and he had this reaction.
I'm truly concerned about what I saw on that video, and I'm glad that the district attorney is going to look at it. You cannot openly punch a young person in the face merely because you are caught up in the aggression of the moment. That is how you have dangerous encounters take place. That situation could have turned into a riot if the other officers there didn't follow the appropriate protocol.
So, again, it makes a lot of sense to tell people you have to step back, you have to let the process play out. But at the same time, there's so much emotion and there's so much history with particularly people of color in the NYPD that it can be hard to do that. So what are your thoughts on someone like the Brooklyn Borough President stepping in and sharing his thoughts?
There's been a state of acrimony between the police department and the communities of color for a long time. It's not something that just exists in New York City, but this is a nationwide crisis. We should have more of a symbiotic relationship between police and community and not separated. So oftentimes when we have a situation such as the Brooklyn Borough President, who is a former captain in the NYPD, making a statement requesting the modification of the officer, I think I'm somewhat opposed to that. I'm a strong proponent of let's let due process play out before we make that assessment. Oftentimes, when we make statements like this, what we do is we rile the base on both sides. I think calmer heads need to prevail, and a lot of times we need to sit down both parties and try to apprise a solution as to how we can move forward from a community perspective, because police are public servants, and at the same same token, we don't want to exasperate the situation. I think that this was more of a situation that if the Brooklyn Borough president felt this way, I can understand it. I thought that that should have been a tabletop information exchange between the Brooklyn Borough president and the police commissioner, James O'Neill, because the two have a relationship. And then upon the conclusion of that meeting, that's when the two entities could have introduced what their feel on a particular incident was. That's my assessment of the situation.
Graham?
I tend to agree. I know both parties. I know Eric. I know James. And I've been the victim of police abuse as a child. Mm-hmm. This knot I have on my head I got from a cop in the 75th precinct when I was about 7 years old. I've been attacked while working in Midtown Manhattan. I know the emotions very personally. But as he stated, emotions run high. And we can't allow our emotions to really overtake us because then we're not thinking properly. But I think that when Eric spoke, he spoke maybe somewhat out of the disgust and the rage. We as black men in law enforcement, we don't become blue. We don't become blue. We remain black men. Because outside of that uniform, you're just another black man on the street. Mm-hmm. And we've had off-duty police officers shot to death here in New York City. So we understand it very well. We have suffered abuses from the department. And I'm not going to get into all of those things, but what I saw was very disturbing. But in the same sense, we want to maintain a level of calmness to proceed clearly. Working behind the scenes, there's got to be someone at the table talking in order to bring about change. Change is not necessarily going to come from demonstrations. I was in Giuliani's office after Amadou Diallo was shot. We were in a meeting. He and I, the quick statement from Giuliani was, let them protest. They'll vent. And then we'll go back to business as usual. That's what Giuliani said. We need more than protests. Mm-hmm. We need changes in policy, and we need accountability. And that is what comes at the sit down at the table, as you mentioned, sitting with the commissioner to bring about those necessary changes. Now, granted, what I saw I didn't like, and I don't believe that officer should be on patrol. He should be modified. He should be put on restricted duty until all of this is worked out. Because again, I don't know what precipitated the incident. I've heard different stories.
Well, we have another incident which we seem to have a little bit of a background of, and that is that a young man, there was a call that went in that a young man, this ended up being Adrian Napier, was alleged to have had a gun. He ran, the cops started chasing him. He ran down to the subway, allegedly jumped the turnstile, got on the train. Then officers at the following stop proceeded to pick him up, and this is what was caught on a citizen video as well. Okay, so again, we see another incident of a young man of color being very aggressively taken down and arrested. Where does this fit? Is this something where we need to step back and sort of understand the bigger picture that this situation happened in? Or is this something where, again, people are going to react emotionally when they see something like that?
I think we need to judge each instance on a case-by-case basis. When you have an officer that's responded to something that we refer to as a gun run, and that consists of an individual that's in possession of a firearm, it really ups the ante in terms of that officer's response. They're now thinking from a perspective of, how can I respond to this safely? How can I remove a dangerous weapon from the street that can possibly harm another human being in the city of New York? So there's somewhat conflicting there's somewhat of conflict that's going through an officer's mind, meaning how can they get in there as quickly as possible and also remove this weapon from this individual, but at the same token, you want this to be a safe encounter. The average officer that takes a gun from a citizen in the street does not fire a shot. The average instance where a gun is removed from an individual does not require a physical exertion such as throwing someone to the floor, things to that effect. So when we look to these situations, we have to look at it from both sides. One of the first things is if the police stop you, if they tell you to freeze, don't move, don't run, especially when we're talking in a situation where there's a gun involved. That doesn't give the officer the right to overly commit to an act of brutality neither. But there are two factions that come into play here. So we had the individual that ran, they jumped the turnstile, and they were subsequently apprehended at the next stop. Granted, this could have been stopped at a much earlier point, because when that individual commits to an act like that, they not only jeopardize themselves, but they jeopardize other New Yorkers in the process. So I'm a firm proponent in firearms control and use the minimum amount of force necessary. I think that what makes this a more that's the sole aspect in quintessential policing. People shouldn't get hurt when they're arrested, but it's a two-pronged component, not just the officer, but the individuals at hand. So as a result of that, if an officer commits to an act of brutality or misconduct, that's when my internal affairs hat kicks in, and I'm a strong proponent in discipline needs to be enacted appropriately if we have that. I'm okay with looking into the incident, but we just have to take in consideration both sides of this. And did the officer abide by the protocols in connection with the patrol guide's use of force?
Okay, so here's my only interjection to that, and that is that, one, the young man turned out to not have a gun on him. That was one. Two, in the video, we see him with his hands up. Albeit, yes, allegedly he did run from the cops at the very beginning, but when we see him on the train, he has his hands up, there's no gun. And then three is that while again, I understand that it's so important for people to comply with the police officers, however, when a brutal arrest fits into a larger pattern of brutal arrest, is it fair to the person who's a member of the group that's being some might say persecuted, to not have that fight or flight instinct now when they see cops? I mean, it's very well known that for most African Americans, when they see a cop, black or white, the blood pressure goes up.
Oftentimes, this is a symptom of a much larger problem. And that symptom of the much larger problem is over-policing or hyper-aggressive policing in particular communities, specifically the socioeconomically deprived communities. And oftentimes, we equate that to the communities of color. I got that, and I understand where you're coming from, but it goes back to what I mentioned. We need to look at it from a case-by-case basis. I can see people, I get pulled over now, and my blood pressure goes through the roof, and I'm an NYPD lieutenant. I'm still somewhat uncomfortable when I'm stopped, but the truth of the matter is there's a certain regiment that I go through, and the gentleman to my right teaches young people on a regular basis how to abide by that regiment so you can effectively exit that engagement with police as quickly as possible and as safely as possible. And so as a result of that, remember, cops are human beings too. And so they want to go home. That doesn't mean that they have a right to brutalize someone based on wanting to go home, but you have to look at it from both sides. And I understand we go back to the days of slave catchers in the early 1600s in the United States, and a lot of these slave patrols eventually evolved into police departments. So when we look at that horrific history of police in the African American community, it makes all the sense in the world. People do run because they don't want to get hurt, but as we're turning the corner and we're looking to affect a change in this police and community relationship, that's when the two sides need to come together, and we need to have a plausible solution how we deal with these police and community engagement.
Graham, I know you want to get in on this.
I've done a number of gun stops in New York, arrested a number of people. I've done gun stops on two men who turned out to be FBI agents. And they wondered, how'd you know I had a gun? It's what I do. I look for guns. I find them. I've had armed suspects, gun in hand, hammer is cocked, .357 Magnum in his hand. Not one shot was fired. The guys that I work with We're not out there to get a combat medal, to get a kill. We were there to effect arrest without harming the individual. And I'm not saying there aren't dangerous people out there, but I've made arrests of armed individuals and not a shot was fired. Walk forward. That situation, I think, was on Franklin Avenue where Napier had his hands up. You had all those police officers. There was an officer with his weapon out on the platform. Mm-hmm. He's the only one that should have his weapon out. He's got the suspect. Instructions should be given. You don't have 10 people rush into a subway car, because if anything does happen, one of the cops are going to wind up hurting another police officer. And we've had that happen too many times, where cops have been shot by their fellow officers, and then they want to blame the suspect. The gentleman has his hands up. You only need 2 officers, 3 at best, to come in, have him stand up, cuff him, search him, take him off the train. You don't need 10 cops tumbling into a train. It's chaos, total chaos. Once the officers have him by hand, the guy outside on the platform, he can holster his weapon. Mm-hmm. All right? Because as you have other officers coming into the view, you don't want anybody else getting hit.
All right. Well, given that we've discussed so much about what's happening, at least on the ground level, let's go a little bit higher up in the ranks and talk about the leadership and how much of an effect the commissioner has on the way policing is actually implemented amongst everyday people. Do you think it was a mistake on the part of the mayor to not choose a person of color?
In the upper cadre of the department, the person who I thought would have made a great commissioner years ago was Phil Banks. And then issues came up with regard to Phil and the 6-0 precinct when they had that incident down to 6-0. But Bratton was pushing Phil into a civilian position. And Phil said, I'm not taking a civilian position, all right? I'm a police officer, and I'm going to remain a police officer. So Phil left. And another thing, it's a little divergent. I never wanted to be a cop. I became a police officer because I felt I could do the job better than a lot of cops that I saw out there doing the job, all right?
That is an interesting note.
And we need our young folks
to
take that attitude. And with it, you're not looking to take this job to be a police officer. With your mind, you're going to study. With your mind, you're going to become a sergeant. With your mind, you're going to become a lieutenant. You're going to become a captain, to take on the leadership roles, to determine how a police officer will and will not do his job under your control. That is what we need. We need our young folks. It's not good enough to be complainers. Mm-hmm. You've got to come in. You've got to get on the inside to bring the change. And no, it's not going to be overnight. We didn't get the Civil Rights Bill passed or the Voting Rights Act passed in 3 years with Martin Luther King. That was an 80-year process. We need young black people to take this exam and take these civil service jobs, which means avoid any confrontations. And we want them, you don't prove your manhood on the street corner with the cop.
Okay. Darren, same thoughts from you on how you see leadership affecting actual policing. And does this new commissioner, does he make a difference or not?
Well, I'm not one that buys into identity politics or identity leadership. I don't think that a person needs to be of a particular race or race, ethnicity, or male or female, because we look at what's happened in places like Baltimore and New Orleans with police departments that were driven by African Americans. But at the same token, this is the third Irish male that's been selected within the de Blasio administration. And I worked in the NYPD, and I know of many qualified African Americans, Latinos, or even females that could have been, that were properly suited for a position as a commissioner. So it really begs the question of his willingness to connect with these communities of color. I just think that we have a very fine tapestry that's multicultural in the NYPD, such as Ben Tucker, for example, who's the first deputy commissioner. He's an African-American male, and he's been in that position for a while, and he's just been passed over left and right as the number 2. So it begs the question of, was there a true scout for talent in the department? I think that we didn't sign up to be mistreated as an African American. We don't want another African American that comes in and mistreats our population. We want a person that's sound, that can do the job. And I just think that this was a very short-sighted move on Mayor de Blasio and not exercising his ability as the chief elected official to possibly find someone else. Because I know that there are great women out there that can do this job. We've never had a female commissioner in the NYPD. We've never had a Latino commissioner in the NYPD. I mean, granted, we've had 2 African-American commissioners over the 160-plus years, but I just think that there's far more in place other than having a male Irish person at the head of the department. Ray Kelly was a commissioner for 12 years. After that, we had William Bratton, then we had James O'Neill, and now we have Shea coming in. I just think that we have more to offer as a society, and I was just somewhat disappointed in de Blasio's choice as a result.
All right, well, unfortunately, gentlemen, on that note, we're going to have to leave it. I would absolutely love to have you both back, because there's so much more I could have kept talking about, but we do have to end. So thank you both for the work that you do and for joining us on the program.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
Absolutely.
Now you can take MetroFocus with you anywhere, anytime. It's simple and it's free. Download the MetroFocus app, available for iPhone and Android. When you do, you'll get the latest news, weather, and traffic for the entire metro area. In the meantime, remember to follow us on Facebook and Twitter for up-to-the-minute information impacting our community. We'll see you again tomorrow.
MetroFocus is made possible by James and Merrill Tisch, Sue and Edgar Wackenheim III, the Sylvia A. and Simon B. Poida Programming Endowment to Fight Anti-Semitism, Bernard and Irene Schwartz, Barbara Hope Zuckerberg, and by